Hey guys, this is Mel, and I'm back to talk about the Winchesters, two episodes being episode 104, titled Masters of War, which premiered on Tuesday, November 1st, 2022, and episode 105, titled Legacy of a Mind, which premiered November 15th, 2022, both on the CW. I'm recording this on November 20th, so sorry for the delay, guys. I didn't know there was a week hiatus between episodes 4 and episode 5, so when I was getting ready to watch what I thought would be episode 5 on November 12th, only to find out that it didn't air for another 3 days. So I'm sorry for the delay. I thought there would be a hiatus next, or I guess this coming week because of the American Thanksgiving, not, but I guess the U.S. elections also happened on the 8th, which is why there wasn't an episode, so apologize for the delay. But I'm back to talk about both episodes. Let's see how they compare. Let's first talk about the main gist of each episode first, then we get into the shocking moments, the favorites, the peeves. We'll go between the two episodes, and then as a whole talk about the questions and the predictions at the very end. So let's truly start off with a huge spoiler alert, not only for the two episodes. If you haven't seen those already, please go do so first and then come back and see what I have to say about the two episodes. But also just a huge spoiler alert for Supernatural in general, because the Winchesters is the prequel series for Supernatural. I am more likely going to be drawing on a lot of references, or if there's parts of what happened on the Winchesters that does remind me of certain events that happened on the Supernatural, because they're supposed to be in the same universe. Still don't know if it's in the same timeline, but just a heads up there in case. If you haven't watched Supernatural already, I might say something that could spoil things, which is a big, major spoiler alert there. So let's truly get started now with episode 4. With timeline-wise, I don't recall if it said specifically how long it's been between episode 3 and episode 4. I didn't have it in my notes, but I don't remember a specific date. But if we go off of the same pacing that Supernatural went off of at the very beginning of the series, I'd probably assume it's within a couple days or at least a week between episode 3 and episode 4. First scene of the episodes is this guy named Patches. He's a veteran at the hospital, I believe. He is confronted by this armored warrior before he's killed in somehow this combat situation, and this is the case of the episode. So the storylines I picked up on two different ones. First one being who's targeting the veterans, second one being moving forward. So with the first storyline, we have John and Carlos going undercover at the hospital where Patches was killed to get closer to a Dr. Z. His full name is probably up on screen, but in my notes he's Dr. Z. While they're going undercover, we have Maria Latika Arlata questioning a reporter who questioned Patch's wife shortly after he died. Turns out that reporter was Kyle Reed, who was Mary's date at the movies, and he ended up buying her that ticket, as we all know. And he was only in town to follow this specific veteran's case, because this isn't the first time veterans died in hospital. It's been happening all over the country from the sounds of it. So that leads them to going into Maggie's bedroom to find a specific lore book. And with it, Latika was able to find out that the creature that is behind all this is Neto, or the Roman god of war, who is immortal until you break his totem, which ends up being this old vase hidden in his room at the hospital. Apparently, Neto was preparing for the war against the Creta and trying to find soldiers who could help in this fight. Turns out Millie, John's mom, was also brought in to help with the case when Mary and Latika needed her in order to get back into the hospital when it was put on lockdown, because she was John's relative, and they couldn't get in without her. And then we ended up seeing a fight between John going against Nito, which ended up taking the form of Jimmy, who was one of the so-called veterans at the hospital. And John took on this fight so that he could save Carlos, who had stepped on this mental landmine. Of course, John prevailed. Second storyline, with moving forward, we do see a bunch of different things going on. We see John struggling more with his memories of Vietnam. He's getting shaking hands. He's seeing flashbacks of Murph dying, things like that. And he's not willing to talk about it when he tries to go undercover as someone who wants help in a support group. Then we got Carlos sharing his own struggles while undercover about his time as a Navy medic. He finds that actually talking about it ends up being helpful for him. We found out also through this that he got into the Navy because he was given a sentence option with either being arrested or going to jail. Or not, when he was arrested, he was either go to jail or enlist in or be recruited by the Navy. He didn't want to be locked up in a cell, so he joined the Navy. We also find out he always lived on the open road in his van and with his guitar as well. So we do see a little bit of that. Apparently, Mary and Latika knew this about Carlos, but John did not. So that's how, because John didn't know, that's how we as the audience found out this little tidbit about Carlos. Outside of the undercover gig, we have Mary and Latika dealing with Maggie's death. They continue on with Maggie's tradition with the postcards, where Maggie would list 2 good things and 1 bad thing about a hunt to kind of stay positive and try to learn from it, I believe. And also, I guess, to let go of the bad energy. We also see Mary offering Maggie's room to Carlos, which beforehand no one went into it. And yeah, so Mary offers up Maggie's old room to Carlos in case he needed a place to stay and didn't want to just stay in his van alone. So there's that. Last scene in the episode shows Millie. It was during like this montagey bit, but it shows Millie comforting John after she finds him clothed in a hot shower. It's a very emotional struggle for him, I guess. Him trying to use the shower to hide up his pain from her. So we see her trying to stand by him so that he can unload and not be alone. Now, death tally. So Patch's death, which happens in the teaser, it's like the opening death of the episode, it's what brings our people to the case, is actually the first death of the series, because I think before, when I talked about episode 1, 2, and 3, the only people who actually died were creatures beforehand. There wasn't any human death. So Patches was actually the first one we got to see. And then Jimmy, I thought, was the first human death, like, during the episode while they were on a case. But Jimmy ended up being the Roman god of war's, like, disguise. So that doesn't count. He did end up dying, but not as a human. He died as an immortal being. So there's that. Tidbit-wise, though, Ada Monroe was not featured in this episode, plus there was no mention of trying to find Samuel Campbell in this episode. There was no show of the Akrita's actions behind the scenes, as in, like, what was happening while the hunters were doing their thing. We didn't see anything like that. This is also another episode that ends with a montage sequence at the very end of it. We also see Mary and John sparring together. Mary can still beat him, even though John is used to sparring back from when he was in basic training, so we got a little bit of that. And there was no mention of the demon trap box as well. So there's that. We also do only get Dean's voiceover at the start of Act 1 as well, after the title card, I believe. Yeah, so there's that. Supernatural parallels. I think I started this the last time I did the double episodes. So this episode had only a few things popping up in my head as, like, reminders. So with Carlos and John going undercover at a hospital, huge reminders of the fact when Sam and Dean checked themselves into a mental hospital to get close to finding the creature that was feeding off of its patients back in season 5. Also, for both of them, they spoke the truth and were allowed inside. So that was a reminder there. I also find another one being because in this episode, Jimmy, or aka the Roman god of war, was preparing or wanting to prepare John for his battle against the Akrita because he was both a hunter and a soldier. He thought he'd be the better pick of it. It reminded me of when the trickster at the time in season 3 was preparing Sam for a life without Dean in the episode Mystery Spot. How he was doing all that to kind of prepare him for, like, what it would be like afterwards. You can kind of also say that it's when Ruby was preparing Sam to drink all the demon blood to take on Lucifer. Like, anything like, well, Sam mainly, he's always been prepared or prepped to take on the roles that they battle. I guess another one could also be Crowley kind of preparing Dean to take on the first blade and taking on Abaddon when they were training him after getting the mark. So yeah, I guess those 3 things, but the main one being, like, the trickster trying to prepare Sam for a life without Dean and being alone on a hunt. So that's something there. So before we get into the most shocking of that episode, let's jump backwards and talk about episode 5. So timeline wise for this, I think it has to be some time has passed since episode 104 because John wanted to take a little break from the last hunt, which was the veteran hunt. I thought it had to be at least some time because John had a lot of wounds after that fight, and yet he didn't. He was completely healed in this episode, but then I remember that but then I remember that during his fight with the Roman god of war, his wounds actually healed. I don't remember why they healed, but they did heal during the fight magically because of what he did. So there's that. The first scene of the episode shows Councilman Gordon Baxter being haunted in his dreams before he is killed. It seemed like his brain was turned to mush or something from the looks of it. He woke up, it seemed like something took over him, and then he just collapsed. And then, like, that was the end of it. Apparently, there was some toxin that was in him, injected 3 times, and by the Akrita, but we'll talk about in a little bit, because storyline-wise, there are 3 different storylines. First one being Nightmare or Something More, 2, First Akrita Attack, and 3, Young Love. So for the first storyline, it starts off with our hunters following the clues from Gordon's death to a possible Jinn, aka Genie attack. This leads them to finding out that the Jinn that they're after is actually Ada's son Tony, who is half human, half Jinn. Through that, they find out that Tony, while he does dreamwalk, when he was dreamwalking with Gordon Baxter to help him face his nightmare, he sensed another monster trying to possess Gordon, which led them to believing that it was the Akrita. So this moves into the second storyline of the first Akrita attack. So when they were saving their last victim from the Akrita from getting poisoned, and it looks like they were trying to use his body to possess it maybe, Mary gets attacked and she gets poisoned instead with the toxin. So because of that, Ada has to go and find her son Tony and beg him to help her save Mary. So then Tony uses his powers to push John into Mary's mind so that John could guide Mary out of her trauma so she could find the hidden toxic stingers from the Akrita, because if Tony went in, she would just run from him, which is counterproductive. So John was able to help Mary. She was able to face a few of her traumatic memories, one being the first kill and another being when she found out monsters were real. We'll talk about a little bit later. But after that, when they were all conscious again, they find out the connection between all the victims before Gordon was that they were all connected to some kind of radio tower, and the name Roxanne Gilbert was on all the paperwork that was associated with it. So they think it makes sense because the radio tower, if they're trying to make this monster broadcast thing, the radio tower would do it. And with the name Roxanne Gilbert, it seemed like they knew that it was the DJ handle Roxy. I don't remember what the other part of her name was. It's probably up on screen. I'm assuming because they turned on the radio right afterwards, after they realized like the name Roxanne Gilbert, I think. So there's that. Now 3, Young Love. So throughout all this, Mary ends up asking Ada Monroe about loving someone from a different world, because in the sense Tony's dad was a Jinn, so that's a different world from Ada being a human, and yet they still pursued each other. They fell in love, and Ada does not regret following her heart in that. And I guess that was the message that Mary got. Also, John overheard this as well, because meanwhile, when asked by his mom, he denies that there's anything between him and Mary, but then he doesn't know how Mary feels at all, so he's not really sure where this leads them or where they could stand. So it's kind of like they're in limbo here. We definitely know that John has feelings for Mary. And we think something growing with Mary, but she's definitely trying to see what the possibility could be. So that's something there. But let's move on to the last scene of episode 105, is that the Akrita leader Roxy is interrupted while on the radio to get a report that Mary didn't succumb to their attempts to possess her body. Minion seems worried about the young hunters, while Roxy isn't worried about them, stating like it's all according to plan or something like that. So that's a little worrisome there. Death tally though for the episode, we do see Councilman Gordon Baxter die in the opening scene, which is the teaser, And then we have 2 human victims off screen getting killed. This is actually the first episode where we didn't actually have the episodic villain be killed off because it's the Krita. They're the season's bad, so we're not really gonna get a creature kill in this one like we did with all the other ones. So that's something a little interesting there. But tidbit wise, though, again, we get Dean's voiceover being featured only at the very start of Act 1, right after the title card showed up. We also find, I touched on a little bit, but we found out that Mary learns about monsters being real when she was 5 years old. And we also found out that her first kill was a young werewolf, so a kid werewolf, both being traumatic. I found it very interesting that of the traumatic memories we saw in memories, I was kind of expecting that we would see Maggie's death being a very traumatic motive because of how many times it's been brought up in the show so far, but it didn't. It just went back to like very young Mary childhood traumatic moments instead of what had happened a year ago. So that's something there. We do see the return of Betty, or Officer Betty, appearing, not in uniform, at home when John visits her to kind of ask her about the case directly, but she does end up telling him her suspicions about 2 other victims being similar to how Gordon Baxter died, but she's not sure how they're connected, but at least that visit is what led John and Mary to the other 2 names to help them find the connection to Roxanne Gilbert. So that's something there. We also find out that Millie had given Henry a motorcycle for his birthday, but he disappeared 2 weeks later, so the motorcycle was never used, so that's why John was working on it with Mary's help. At the end of the episode, John does give Mary the motorcycle for when she's done with hunting. He even agrees with her about maybe wanting to leave Lawrence after she's done hunting because of like wanting to leave old memories, because I think he was a little bit hesitant when she said that at the start of the episode, but by the end of it he was like, yeah, I agree with you, you might need to leave. So that's another thing. This episode is the first to not have an ending montage like we've seen in the previous 4 episodes, and there is no mention of the demon trap box in this episode as well. Now, for the supernatural parallels I found, the whole idea of like don't be afraid of the dark, or don't be afraid of under your bed, like that similar line. Of course, we heard it in the supernatural pilot when Sam said, I told Dad about the thing under my bed and he gave me a 49. Something similar. John reiterated that in the Winchester pilot, that Henry said something similar on how like he can handle it or something. Very, I don't know. But Mary had her own version of this now, where she was told that the monsters were real. So I thought that was an interesting parallel, that like all 3 of them had a different response to the same scenario. Another parallel I found was that the whole idea of them facing traumas in their dream. So like for Mary having to, I guess Councilman also did it, but Mary having to face her trauma within her mind in order to escape. That's very similar to what Sam and Dean had to do in season 3 of Supernatural, when they had to use the dream route to get into Bobby's head to help him face his trauma that was trapping him in there. We got a similar case in season 8 when Dean went into Charlie's head to help her escape the trauma she had during a gin case as well. So that's more of a close parallel than the Bobby one. But like that was interesting. That was specifically because Dean had to go into Charlie's mind to help get her out, just like how John had to go into Mary's mind to help get her out. So that's something there. Another parallel you could say is between Tony and Jack from Supernatural. The whole fear of the child becoming like their supposedly evil father. So Ada feared that Tony would become like his hungry gin father, while with Jack, everyone feared that he'd become like his father Lucifer, and they both proved that they were nothing like their fathers. They were able to pave their own way with their powers, so that's something there. And then, of course, the mechanics lessons that we got. So we see John trying to teach Mary how to her way around an engine. Of course, Mary already knew this because the Campbells already taught her that, but it's this kind of similar setup where Dean was trying to teach Sam his way around the Impala engine. Sam knows a little bit about it, but like the whole idea of like teaching you so you know how it works kind of a thing. So that was kind of similar vibes there as well. Of course, different context, but like the idea of like giving a lesson. So there's that. So now let's talk about the most shocking moment of both the episodes. So for episode 104, I wrote that the surprising thing for me was that Mary and Latika brought Millie along to help with the case. Definitely was not expecting it. I thought they would try to do their own lie or try to sneak into it, but instead they just went straight to the fact that they can't get in without a family member. They knew if they already had a family member in the know, so let's go grab her. So I thought that was very, very interesting. I guess it was also convenient too that the case was actually located nearby, so like why not? But that was a shock there. And then the 105 shock was that that the hunters already suspect a connection with Roxanne Gilbert to the Akrita, or at least the DJ Roxy handle. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, we as the audience just found out, I think, like 2 episodes ago, about her being the Akrita leader, or at least her body is acting as the vessel for the Akrita leader. But I definitely was not expecting our characters to know that already at this point, you know? So that was a surprise there. But let's move on to top favorite moments. So for my favorites of 104 would have to be John and Carlos. I really like the new understanding that came between them. I really like that it was something that they had a common bond growing between them. It was very interesting. It's definitely something where it's like, yes, they had a great dynamic in the pilot with Carlos giving him that very, very quick exorcism lesson. And then there's always someone else between them. So I really like that they got to bond and team up in this episode. Of course, I really like another favorite being John and Mary, specifically them sparring and just actually seeing John being trained to in different aspects of hunting and not shying away from certain things. So that was a very cool thing. Also, their whole dynamic, it's just interesting to see different iterations of how their bond can grow and what they talk about and what comes up during the case to like help each other out. Um, so that's the thing there. And the third thing I really like was just Mary and Latika, or Lata, handling their own grief for Maggie and how they were there for each other and trying to help each other move forward, and then both of them choosing to continue with the postcard tradition. I hope we see little postcards pop up with each case and have them going back to like doing that at the end of it, or at least kind of like a hint that they would, or that's still on their mind. It's not just this one episode thing. So that was a favorite there. My favorites for 105 was obviously John and Mary for sure. We do see I guess the more open-minded idea of like possible romance between the two of them, but they don't know what the other one, like where the other one stands, or even where they stand in this situation. Is interesting to see that they're spending a lot more time together, especially at the opening of like working on the motorcycle together. But yeah, for sure. And then like the worry of like when John trying to get Mary to keep fighting so that she could survive the attack and not like die because he doesn't want her to die. Like, you know what I mean? So it's just like trying to get her to do everything he can to survive. So that's something. I really like we got to know a lot more about Ada Monroe's past, specifically what happened with her and Tony, what that dynamic was. We also got to see the progression of like how it progresses and like where they left off versus like how they were like on the way of like getting to a better place between each other by the end of the episode. So I really like the progression of it. I also really like, as a side note, for knowing more about Ada, was just seeing how Carlos was there for her and like trying to be supportive of her and trying to just like be there for her when it came to her son. And then also at the very end, I think there's a moment between Tony and Latika. He did ask her if he can write to her sometime, and she said yes with a big smile. So I'm like, I'd love if we got to see him again in the future, but he did say that he's gonna get as far away as he can, so it's quiet and away from the Akrita. With him being half human, half Jinn, I don't know if he would be someone that they would want on their radar or not. Who knows? But I do hope we see Tony again though later. So there's that. Let's move on to top peeved moments. I didn't have anything written for 104, but for 105, big peeve I had was just the full-on reveal of the Akrita. It was to our characters, like they actually got to see what the Akrita looked for the first time. For me, it was very CGI obvious. And yeah, and that was just kind of a bummer for me. It kind of took me away from it, because for Supernatural, I remember from like the very early ons of like season 1, and why I really liked the show was the fact that for all the creepy elements of the show, it was all like from like camera tricks, or like it's hiding in the darkness, or it's the anticipation, or like the moment you actually see the creature, it's still terrifying because it's in the darkness and like you have nowhere to go, and it's just like you're trying to make out what it is, and then like you can't, so it's like that adds another level to that fear. So it's just like it plays off of that, or us not fully, the audience not fully seeing it, but we like see like a shadow, or like a trace of it or something, like to build onto that fear. But this like full on CGI Akrita reveal is just like no, like it was obvious, and like that kind of takes me out of it. So like I'm a little peeved by that, because it's just like, oh yeah, okay. So sadly, there's that. But let's move on to random questions very quickly. My 104 questions start with the first one of why was the psych ward in lockdown when Millie arrived to see John? Did the psych ward know that John and Carlos were missing? It definitely wasn't because Jimmy's body was missing from the from the morgue, because Dr. Z only found that out while he was talking to Millie, and the ward was already on lockdown. So why exactly was it on lockdown before they arrived? I really don't remember. I really don't recall if it had said it. So that's something. Another question was, what was Neto's motive in targeting veterans? Was he looking for a soldier that could stand against the Akrita? Was he just trying to test people to make sure that they were ready, or did he need someone to like take a place of something, like to stand in for someone else? I don't know. Like, why was he fixated on John? That would be the question there. And then overall, I'm always gonna ask this question, but um, is this John and Mary from the Supernatural timeline, or is this an alternate version of John and Mary? After this episode, I still think it's an alternate version of John and Mary, just from John's behavior, as well as just from John's behavior of dealing with his own memories about Vietnam, as well as like his own actions against the Roman god of war, but then also because of his support that he gets from his mom. And I guess her involvement too, because as far as on Supernatural, we don't really hear much about John's mom, and it doesn't sound like Sam and Dean were close to their grandmother. It didn't even sound like she was still alive. So it's the question of like, yeah, if yeah, still thinking that it's an alternate version just from that alone. But my questions for 105 would be, why was Councilman Gordon Baxter killed if the Akrita were looking for human bodies to possess? Like, what made that switch of you being, oh, you're a viable vessel, to you being, you're collateral damage? Like, I didn't quite get that. Because, like, I know with Mary, they were trying to take her body over. But, like, would that be like they're trying to kill the mind so that they could take the body over? And, like, kind of like what the demons do? Or was it like that they just needed the body, like, completely, like, an empty shell kind of a thing? I have no idea. Like, what was the toxin meant to do? So that's one. Another question was, if the Akrita need to collect the essence of rare monsters, are they controlling these monsters to kill in ways that attract hunters to kill them? Or are they just following these rare monsters and letting them do their thing, and then the moment that, and knowing that hunters are going to catch on, wait until the hunters kill them, right? So that's a question there. Another question was, did the Akrita target Mary because they had Samuel Campbell? Will we get a repeat of the demon getting a hold of... Will we get a repeat like we did in Supernatural, where the demons got a hold of John Winchester, who ended up being possessed by the yellow-eyed demon at the end of season 1? Would we see that with the Akrita possessing Samuel Campbell and using him to get closer to our young hunters? Wouldn't surprise me, that's for sure. Trojan horse kind of a thing. Um, and another question is, will we see Tony again? Again, I love the idea of him mending his relationship with his mother, but then also the potentialness that is between him and Lata when he asked if he could write to her. I thought that'd be cool. So that's something there. And of course, again, do I believe after this episode this is the supernatural timeline version of John and Mary, or is this an alternate version of John and Mary? I still think it's an alternate version between them, just because of, yeah, I still think it's alternate. It's probably the same thing of like, um, probably the same reasons as episode 104. It's like there's a bunch of things. It's like the small things, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah, rare creatures though. I still think it's alternate. I'm still waiting for it to be alternate, but alternate confirmation, I should say. But yeah, that's about it. But let's move on to predictions very quickly. I have not seen the promo yet as I'm recording this for episode 106. As I'm recording this, I haven't, but by the time I'm editing the video, some points of what I noticed up on screen will be there. I know they mentioned a werewolf, the little brief bit I got to see before it switched channels on me, because it was a different region. But the synopsis, though, of the episode reads that Mary gets a call from an old family friend who's looking for some help, but when the team arrives, they learn that some crucial details were left out. While Latika struggles with being a hunter and questions her future with it, John's eagerness and commitment to the hunt worries Mary. Carlos finds himself in a situation he's never experienced before and doesn't know what to do with himself. We don't see a mention of Ava here, so I'm not sure if she's going to be visible again or shown. But our main four hunters, or at least have something going on, so I'm excited to see what happens there. Apparently, this episode is going to air on the 22nd, and then it's going to go on another week hiatus, I believe. Let me just double check the dates here. Also found out, or I looked into a little bit more today, but it looks like season 1 is only going to have 13 episodes. So I guess we are quickly approaching the midway point of the season. But let me see here. Yeah, so episode 6 is going to air on the 22nd. We're going to get a break, and then episode 7 will air on December 6th. So my next video will cover episode 6 and episode 7 together, even with that 1 week break in between it. I'll keep that in mind next time, though. But just a heads up that that's why there's a delay. But otherwise, I think that is going to be it for today. What did you guys think of the 2 episodes? What did you guys like about it? What do you think will happen next? How are you liking the prequel series as a whole in general? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos if you haven't done so already. If you want, check out my Tumblr page. Link in the description below. Same with my WordPress. It's down below as well. I haven't been on Tumblr or WordPress in a long time. I'm still trying to figure out a balance. But I haven't started anything for the Winchesters. But if you want to see like all the supernatural stuff, it's going to be there. But otherwise, that is going to be pretty much it. I did have a question though, guys, because I'm not sure if it's just how I watch TV now, but I know my videos are becoming less and less frequent like they used to be when I was like starting to upload, and I would be watching the episodes on the day they aired because I didn't know where to find them on next day streaming. I didn't have access to like a PVR type of a saving thing, so I really could only watch them on the day of or 3 hours later if I had the time shifting channel for it. And then I record my reactions that same night, and then I would either edit it the day after if I had time, or I'd be waiting for a massive editing day on the weekend, and then I'd repeat the process. Now that with like what happened with the pandemic and everything's with streaming now, and it's just like now I do have access to something of a PVR because my building switched its cable provider. I'm finding I'm not really in a rush to watch the episodes. As long as it's recording, it's like, I can watch it later, which I find I'm doing for the Winchesters. Also because my work ends halfway through the Winchesters episode. So it's like, timing wise, I'm wondering if like, is that just me, or do you guys find that how you watch TV is differently now than like a year ago, 2 years ago? I'm very interested in it. It's definitely having me rethink how I do my videos or if I should do my videos. So I want your own thoughts about that too. If you'd like, let me know in the comments down below. But otherwise, just thank you for hearing my weird rant about it. And yeah, just a heads up that the next video for episodes 6 and 7 will be together. So it's going to be roughly in December. So until then, guys, this is Mel. Wish you all a great day, great week, wherever you are. Thank you for listening to what I had to say for the episode. I really appreciate that. But I hope you do come back to see what I have to say about the next 2 episodes. Till then, bye, guys.